It began with a crumpled note, stuffed into the side gate, scribbled in thick red marker, with no signature. "Control your dog or I will." At first it felt like a petty threat, another complaint from the same neighbor who had filed noise reports about wind chimes and complained to the HOA when kids rode bikes too loudly, but it lingered in the back of their minds. Max, their German shepherd, was loud when strangers approached the fence, but never aggressive. He was a protector, especially with the kids, always alert, always on watch. They had taken every step to be responsible: training, secured fencing, even a sound-dampening privacy barrier. Still, someone had decided he was a problem, and just days later they learned how far that person was willing to go. One afternoon, Max stumbled through the back door, foam collecting at the corners of his mouth, his back leg shaky, his breathing rapid and uneven. Panic set in instantly. They rushed him to the emergency vet, hearts pounding, afraid of what they already suspected. The diagnosis confirmed their worst fear. Max had been poisoned. Bromadiolone, a common but lethal rat toxin hidden inside something he would eat without suspicion. The vet's eyes told them what the report didn't. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill their dog. They had security cameras, and what those cameras captured sent a chill through their entire world. A figure creeping along the alley, pausing at their fence, tossing something over the side. Not a shadow, not a blur, but someone familiar, someone they had seen at every HOA meeting, scowling from behind a clipboard. Someone who had once said, "If the board won't fix it, I will." That someone was Karen. And now they weren't just going to protect their dog. They were going to make sure everyone knew what she had done. Max had become part of the family the moment he stepped through their front door. They found him at a shelter just outside the city, 8 months old, lanky and awkward, with alert eyes and ears too big for his head. The staff told them he had been surrendered by a previous owner who couldn't handle him. But the moment their kids knelt down beside his crate, Max leaned his head into their hands as if he had always belonged to them. He came home that same day, and from that moment on, everything changed. He was intelligent, almost unnervingly so. He learned commands in a matter of days, understood routines, and had an uncanny sense of who belonged on the property and who didn't. He was never violent, never unpredictable, but he barked. It was his job, in a way. Delivery trucks, strangers walking by, a squirrel on the fence. He announced them all, not incessantly, just enough to make his presence known. And in a quiet suburban neighborhood where most people pretended nothing ever happened, Max was a reminder that the world was always moving just outside their picket fences. They worked with a trainer early on to make sure his instincts didn't become a nuisance. They installed privacy panels along the fence to reduce his visibility. They added a motion-triggered ultrasonic bark control device near the back gate. At night, Max slept in the living room, curled into a donut of fur, calm and still. The kids loved him fiercely. He waited for them at the door every afternoon, ran to greet them with a soft woof and a wag of his tail. On weekends, he followed them around the yard like a guardian. He never strayed, he never snapped, but he barked, and for one neighbor, that bark was too much. Karen had made her presence known shortly after they moved in. She didn't introduce herself with cookies or a wave, but with a formal letter from the HOA outlining noise guidelines and pet regulations. It hadn't even been a week. At the time, they thought she was just overly diligent. Every neighborhood had one, a person who confused control with care. But as the months went on, her fixation on Max became impossible to ignore. She filed noise complaints, left typed notes about leash lengths and property lines. She made comments in passing about how some people just weren't cut out for dog ownership. Max didn't know any of this, of course. All he knew was the perimeter of his yard, the scent of his family, the patterns of their daily life. He loved the sound of children playing, the warm slab of stone on the back patio, the breeze that carried messages he understood better than humans ever could. And he barked, not because he was angry, but because it was his voice. He was a guardian, not a threat. To the family, his voice was background music, reassuring, familiar, a sign that they were home, that someone was always watching out for them. But to Karen, it was an offense, a disruption of the artificial order she worked so hard to maintain. Still, the family tried to accommodate. They adjusted Max's schedule, brought him inside during HOA meetings, walked him in quieter areas. But no matter what they did, Karen always found a reason to glare from her front porch or report another infraction. Her complaints became part of the wallpaper, frustrating, but not dangerous, until the notes changed, until the tone shifted, until the threat no longer came from an official form, but from a handwritten message laced with something darker, something personal. Max, unaware of the storm gathering around him, continued to live his life the only way he knew how, with loyalty, with vigilance, with trust in the people who had saved him once and would protect him again if they had to. He didn't know that someone had decided he was a problem to be solved, that someone had started planning the moment she realized barking wouldn't stop. He didn't know that his family would soon have to fight, not just for their peace, but for his life. The notes started off printed, polite, and couched in language that sounded almost like concern. "Just a friendly reminder," one said, clipped to the mailbox with a paperclip. "Dogs should be kept from disturbing the peace, especially during quiet hours. Section 3.7 of the HOA Code." It was unsigned, but typed neatly on letterhead from the Community Association, likely downloaded and printed at home. They had received similar notices before, parking warnings, reminders about trash bins not being left out past 10 a.m. But this one felt different. It didn't refer to any specific event. It was vague, passive. It wasn't enforcement. It was intimidation wearing a polite mask. At first, they tried to ignore it. Max was a dog. He barked occasionally, but not excessively. They had consulted with a trainer to ensure his behavior was appropriate for a suburban environment. They had even kept records of his bark patterns on a decibel monitor, just in case they ever had to prove he wasn't the monster one neighbor seemed to believe he was. But the notes kept coming. The second one arrived a few days later. This one wasn't on HOA paper. It was handwritten in careful cursive on lined stationery, slipped under their front door. "Your dog's behavior is affecting the community's peace and serenity," it read. "We expect better from residents who claim to be responsible." Again, no signature, no return address, just a quiet threat wrapped in flowery script. The tone was condescending, but the message was clear. Someone had decided that Max's bark was not just a sound, but an offense. The family began to suspect Karen almost immediately. She had been vocal about Max during the last HOA meeting, raising her hand to complain that certain dogs were becoming a nuisance. When pressed, she refused to name the family, but the implication was obvious. She lived just 2 houses down, close enough to hear Max's bark, and had long made it known that she believed pets belonged indoors or in kennels, not patrolling fenced yards like territorial wolves, as she once put it. Her words had drawn eye rolls from other board members, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. The third note arrived on a Tuesday, written in red marker on plain white printer paper. It had been crumpled, then smoothed out and pinned to their front gate. "Control your dog or I will," it read. This time, there was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't concern. It wasn't a reminder. It was a threat, blunt and direct. And it made the hair on the back of the father's neck stand up as he read it in the morning sun. That was the day he installed the cameras. One on the back corner of the house, facing the yard. One near the alley that ran behind the property. Another angled toward the gate just above the mailbox. He didn't tell anyone outside the family. There was no announcement, no warning. He simply wanted to know who was leaving the messages and whether this was just a disgruntled neighbor or something more dangerous. Karen, for her part, became more overt. She walked slower past their house. She stared longer at Max through the fence. Once, she even pulled out her phone and appeared to record him barking, though he had only let out 2 quick barks when a delivery truck pulled up across the street. When the father waved to her, she didn't wave back. She turned and walked off, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. Inside the house, the family tried not to show their worry. They didn't want their kids to be afraid. But every new note added another layer of tension. Every time Max barked, they looked up, wondering if another warning would follow. They spoke in hushed tones about HOA rules, city ordinances, trespassing laws. They wondered aloud how far Karen would go, even as they told themselves she wouldn't do anything drastic. She was just being dramatic, they said. She liked control. That was all. But deep down, a sliver of doubt had already taken root. Because there's a difference between someone who wants things quiet and someone who wants things gone. And the way Karen watched Max, like she was calculating something, had started to feel less like annoyance and more like intent. The notes stopped after the red marker threat. But that wasn't comforting, it was worse, because silence from someone like Karen wasn't retreat. It was planning. And though they didn't know it yet, she had already decided what she would do next. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. The day had been ordinary in every way. School drop-offs, grocery errands, emails unanswered. The sun was out, the air crisp, and Max was in the backyard, as he often was around that time, patrolling the fence line, lying in the sun, occasionally letting out a bark if someone walked too close to the edge of his territory. The kids were inside doing homework, and the parents were cleaning up from lunch, not even thinking twice about the routine that had become so natural it barely registered anymore. It wasn't until the youngest child opened the sliding door to let Max in that they realized something was wrong. He didn't come running, No excited bark, no sound of paws scrambling against the tile floor, just silence. She called his name once, twice, and when he still didn't appear, the father stepped outside, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Max was at the far end of the yard, near the corner by the side alley. He was standing, but barely. His legs shook under his weight. His head hung low, and his mouth was frothing with thick white foam. The father ran to him and knelt down, panic blooming in his chest like a fire. Max tried to wag his tail, but it came out as a twitch. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. The towel dropped from the father's hand as he shouted for help, lifting Max's heavy body into his arms as best he could. The dog was limp, but still alive. He yelled for the kids to grab the car keys. The next few minutes were a blur, a frantic drive across town, hazard lights flashing, the father's voice breaking as he begged the receptionist at the emergency clinic to take them in immediately. The vet didn't waste time. They rushed Max into the back, the door swinging shut behind him as a nurse asked questions in a rapid-fire cadence. Did he eat anything unusual? Any pesticides used in the yard? Any medications he could have gotten into? The father shook his head. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just his normal food. Just his normal yard. 2 hours later, the vet returned, gloves stained, her face calm, but tight. They had stabilized Max, at least for now, but her diagnosis was unequivocal. Poisoning. Specifically, bromadiolone, a second-generation anticoagulant rodenticide, rat poison, a powerful, slow-acting chemical designed to cause internal bleeding, hidden, she guessed, in meat or something savory enough for a dog to eat without hesitation. She was blunt. This had been intentional. The dose, the delivery method, the rapid onset. It wasn't consistent with environmental exposure or a wandering animal getting into a neighbor's garage. Someone had given this to Max deliberately. The father sat in stunned silence as her words sank in. Not a careless accident. Not a terrible coincidence. Someone had tried to kill their dog. He drove home in silence that evening, the vet's report on the passenger seat, Max still under monitoring at the clinic. The children were quiet, too, shaken by the rush and fear, not fully grasping the weight of what had happened, but sensing the shift in the air. The mother sat with them on the couch, one arm around each, waiting for him to walk through the door and tell her what she already suspected. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, he went into the yard with a flashlight. He walked every inch of the grass, examining corners, turning over flower pots, checking the base of the fence. And then, near the spot where he'd found Max, he saw it. Shredded wax paper, a scrap of what looked like raw meat still clinging to it, discolored and damp. He used a plastic bag to collect it, sealed it, and placed it in the garage. Then he checked the footage. The security camera above the gate had a clear view of the alley. He rewound to the window of time between lunch and the incident, and there it was. At 2:47 p.m., a figure appeared at the side of the fence. Not fully visible, but the outline was clear. A woman, average height, with a cropped haircut and a familiar oversized sweater. She approached from the side, paused, and reached over the fence. A tossing motion, a moment of stillness. Then she turned and walked back the way she came. He froze the frame, zoomed, enhanced as best he could. It wasn't high definition, but it was enough. The posture, the hair, the route, the timing. It was Karen, and now he knew without doubt this wasn't about barking. This wasn't about rules. It was about control, about cruelty disguised as order. And she had crossed a line no rulebook could justify. She hadn't just violated a policy. She had declared war. The footage was grainy but damning. He had replayed it dozens of times, frame by frame, not because he needed to confirm what he already knew, but because he couldn't quite believe it. The figure approaching from the alley behind the yard didn't rush. She walked slowly, deliberately, like someone who had done this sort of thing before, or at least rehearsed it in her mind. The angle of the camera didn't catch her face directly, but the posture, the mannerisms, the rigid way she turned, those were things you couldn't mistake if you'd spent months watching the same person stare down your home every time she passed. At 2:47 p.m., she paused near the southeast corner of the yard, just a few feet from where Max usually liked to nap in the afternoon sun. Her arm extended over the fence. A small object, likely the meat-wrapped poison, was tossed casually with practiced ease, as if dropping junk mail into a box. Then she adjusted her sleeve, stepped back, and disappeared the same way she came. The entire event lasted less than 15 seconds. But its impact would stretch into weeks, maybe months. He didn't sleep that night. He copied the footage onto a flash drive, saved backups in cloud folders, printed screenshots, labeled everything with dates and timestamps. At 1 a.m, he wrote an email to the local police department, attaching the video and the vet's toxicology report. He kept his tone professional but firm. He wasn't accusing, not yet. But he wanted a report filed. He wanted them to know this wasn't a neighborhood dispute. This was a crime. By morning, a patrol officer arrived, young, polite, but clearly unsure how to handle what was now sitting in his hands. Attempted animal poisoning, backed by documentation, medical reports, and security footage. The officer took his statement and the evidence, promised to escalate it to a detective. But there were limits. Without a clear facial ID or a witness, they couldn't formally charge anyone. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to open an official case file, enough to knock on doors. The officer visited Karen's home that afternoon. No one answered the door. The curtains were drawn, and her car was conspicuously missing from the driveway. But word travels fast in neighborhoods like theirs, and within 24 hours, everyone on the block knew something had happened. The father didn't post the video immediately. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to be right. But when the police confirmed they were pursuing it as a legitimate investigation and neighbors began asking questions, he shared it, not with outrage, not with drama, just the facts. The video, the timestamp, the toxicology report, and a short explanation. Our dog, Max, was poisoned this week. This is the footage we found. Please be aware and protect your pets. The response was immediate. First came the neighbors, sympathetic, shocked, some angry that they hadn't noticed anything strange. Then came messages from other residents in nearby neighborhoods, people who had dealt with similar acts of cruelty but had never captured proof. Pet owners began resharing the video. A local community watchdog group picked it up. Then the local news reached out. They had seen the clip online and asked if the family was willing to speak on camera. He hesitated, This wasn't about going viral, it was about justice. But something in him knew that silence wouldn't protect Max or any other pet. Visibility would. He agreed under one condition: no sensationalism. Just the truth. Just the facts. The segment aired 2 nights later. The reporter was respectful. They blurred the footage to obscure identities, didn't name Karen, but anyone familiar with the area knew. They showed the alley, the fence, Max's recovery at the vet, the parents speaking in calm, steady voices about how they had tried to do everything right and how they had been ignored until it was almost too late. After the story aired, the pressure mounted. Karen stopped appearing at HOA meetings. Her usual walks around the block ceased. The board received dozens of emails demanding a response. While they couldn't expel her based on allegations alone, they issued a statement condemning targeted acts of harm against community members and their pets. They promised to revisit bylaws regarding surveillance, animal safety, and neighborhood conflict resolution. For the family, the video wasn't revenge. It was protection, a way to say, we saw you, we know, and now so does everyone else. The footage didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a satisfying confession, but it was enough to shift the balance of power. Karen's grip on the neighborhood, once firm and unchallenged, had begun to crack. And for the first time since Max stumbled through the door foaming and confused, the family felt like they were no longer alone. They had evidence. They had the truth. And they had a neighborhood starting to pay attention. The fallout didn't come with sirens or handcuffs. It came in quiet waves, whispers at mailboxes, glances across driveways, and a silence that began to grow around Karen's house like an invisible fence. The morning after the news segment aired, the neighborhood's group chat, usually filled with lost cat notices and bake sale reminders, erupted. People who had never spoken up suddenly had stories. One neighbor recalled how her son's bike had gone missing from the front yard weeks ago, only to be found behind Karen's fence, no explanation ever given. Another remembered her dog refusing to walk past Karen's house, tail tucked, body trembling. None of these things had seemed significant before, but now they fit together. They formed a pattern. Karen's porch, once decorated with seasonal wreaths and pristine potted plants, sat empty. The shades stayed drawn. Her car didn't move. The clipboard she once carried on her daily walks, logging every minor infraction she could spot, was nowhere in sight. She missed 2 HOA meetings in a row, an unthinkable offense from someone who had once demanded that trash bins be measured for proximity to the curb. A third absence meant automatic suspension from her board position. No one reminded her. The HOA, under pressure from both residents and the local press, issued a formal statement. It didn't name her directly, but it condemned any acts of intentional harm or retaliation within our community, and announced the formation of a new subcommittee on animal welfare and resident accountability. The president of the board, a man who had once privately rolled his eyes at Karen's complaints but publicly stayed neutral, came to the family's door with a printed apology. He said the words carefully, clearly, as if they had been practiced, but he brought with him a document, a proposed amendment to the HOA charter that would explicitly prohibit retaliatory acts against pets and empower homeowners to install surveillance equipment without prior approval in cases of suspected abuse. It wasn't everything, but it was something. More than that, the neighborhood itself had changed. The father noticed it in the way people started waving more often when they passed, the way kids stopped by the fence to say hi to Max, dropping biscuits and drawing pictures that they taped to the gate, the way one woman, usually reclusive, brought over a bag of treats and simply said, "I believe you." It was subtle, not theatrical, but it was solidarity. The story spread beyond the block. Online, people shared it again and again, not just because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. Everyone seemed to have a Karen in their life, someone who had crossed a line, made others small to feel powerful. Max became something of a symbol, his picture reshared on forums. His recovery updates followed like chapters in an unfolding book. Karen, meanwhile, was vanishing. Rumors swirled that she had been approached by lawyers, that she had tried to file a defamation suit, but was told the evidence worked against her. Her property was quietly listed for sale online, the description full of phrases like peaceful community and well-maintained HOA. But comments under the listing appeared quickly. Screen captures, links to the video, warnings to potential buyers. The internet doesn't forget, and neither did the people who had watched what she tried to do. The family, for their part, didn't celebrate. They didn't post updates about Karen. They didn't spike the football. What they did was protect Max. They upgraded the fencing, installed more cameras. Their children began volunteering at an animal shelter, inspired by what had happened. At the next HOA meeting, the father spoke, not with anger, but with clarity. He read a short statement about safety, about responsibility, and about what it means to be a neighbor. Then he sat down. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. Max recovered fully. His strength returned, his bark came back, his energy doubled. But he was different now, more watchful, more attached. He followed the kids closely, waited at doors longer, positioned himself between them and strangers without command. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. The same way the family had changed. They weren't just residents anymore, they were witnesses. The fallout didn't bring closure. It didn't undo the fear or the betrayal, but it left behind something stronger: connection, awareness, and the knowledge that silence, once broken, doesn't have to settle again. And for Karen, who once believed she could act without consequence, the neighborhood had spoken clearly, finally, and all at once. Not here, not anymore. Max lay stretched out on the porch again, head resting between his front paws, ears flicking at the occasional breeze. It had become his favorite spot, just far enough to see the gate, close enough to hear the back door creak when someone came outside. The family moved around him like always, but now there was a softness in every glance, a quiet relief behind every hand that passed over his fur. He had survived. He had come through something they never imagined they'd have to face, and now that it was over, the house felt different, lighter, still vigilant, but no longer on edge. The justice they had hoped for hadn't come in a dramatic courtroom moment or with police tape strung across Karen's perfect hedges. It had come in pieces, in rules rewritten, in silence broken, in the strength of a neighborhood that had stopped pretending everything was fine and finally acknowledged what had happened. The new HOA animal safety policy passed with no objections. It included provisions not only for pet safety and surveillance rights, but also clear language about retaliation, hostile complaints, and neighbor conduct. It was the first time the HOA had ever put anything in writing that even resembled compassion. And it was directly tied to Max. The family didn't ask for recognition, but when the board president presented the motion, he acknowledged the case that had brought to light a failure in how we protect not just animals, but each other. Karen's house sold quietly. There was no moving truck, no garage sale, no goodbyes. Just one day the curtains opened and everything was gone. The new owners, a couple with 2 toddlers and a golden doodle, introduced themselves with a plate of banana bread and "We saw the story and we're glad you stayed." Max took to the new neighbors easily. He still barked when someone approached the fence, but it was more of a greeting now, a hello, not a warning. The family didn't try to train that out of him, not anymore. His bark had saved him in its own way. It had revealed something that would have stayed hidden if he'd been quiet. They had learned not to apologize for it. The local vet clinic that had treated him posted a photo of Max on their bulletin board. A small caption underneath that read, "Client of the Month. Fighter, survivor, good boy." The kids beamed when they saw it. They told everyone who would listen. And when Max came in for his follow-ups, the staff always gave him a little extra treat, even when he didn't need one. The father still checked the cameras every now and then, mostly out of habit. But nothing unusual ever showed up again. No shadowed figures, no tossed objects. The footage was filled with ordinary things now. Neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, leaves blowing down the sidewalk. The kind of peace that felt earned, not because bad things couldn't happen, but because they knew what to do when they did. One Saturday afternoon, the family hosted a block party. Nothing fancy, just a grill, a few folding tables, coolers full of lemonade. People came, more than they expected. Some brought their dogs. Some brought their stories. The father gave a short toast, just a few sentences about community, about how silence doesn't protect anyone, and how grateful they were for the people who chose to speak up. He didn't mention Karen. He didn't have to. Everyone there knew why they were gathered. Max made his rounds at the party, stopping by each group of people for a scratch, a compliment, a crust of burger bun when no one was looking. He wore a red bandana around his neck and sat still while the neighborhood kids took turns posing with him for pictures. They called him the hero dog and drew signs that said, "We love Max," taped around the fence. Later that night, as the party wound down and the lights on the porch glowed faintly against the dusk, Max curled up in his usual spot again. The father sat beside him, a hand resting gently on his back. They didn't say anything. There wasn't anything left to say. Justice had already arrived, not all at once, not in the way people expected, but in the quiet return to safety, in the knowledge that the bark of one dog had echoed farther than they ever thought it could.